Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and on today's episode, we're airing the second half of my interview with Allan Savory, founder of the world-famous Savory Institute. Now, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, press pause on this one, go back to last week, listen to the first half of the amazing interview with Allan Savory, and then come back to this one and hit play. As I mentioned on last week's episode, Allan Savory has a rich career spanning politics, military, ecologist, farmer, all around the world. Very, very knowledgeable man. Really enjoyed this interview. Listen up to the second half with Allan Savory.
Between holistic plan grazing and any of the many derivatives, particularly adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which is the latest to emerge, which has never been defined, so nobody knows what the hell it really is. But if that is the latest, because there have been over 20 derivatives of my work, I'm afraid. But when we look at them, if you were with your family in Brazil, in the Amazon forest, clearing trees to grow grass to raise cattle, as a great many are doing. Now, if you came in with adaptive multi-paddock grazing, mob grazing, any of the many things that are promoted, you would do that. And you advise people how to do it, etc., if they're running cattle in that situation. Now, if you came in with holistic plan grazing, your first step is that word holistic. And you'd be looking at culture, people managing their families, their culture. Then they have to finance the family, the farm, the business, and then they have to manage nature to produce food in whatever form. Because you only actually manage three things, those three. Everything else you produce. You produce grain, you produce wheat, you produce beef, you produce milk. You don't manage it. All right, so that holistic means you look at those three things. Now, if you and your family were, as I say, in Brazil, in the Amazon, and you've taken on a property like that, or you're contemplating it, as you did that first step, you would say, oh, stop. If I run cattle here, I will damage my family, I'll damage my society, I'll damage the economy, I will damage the environment, I'll do harm to humanity and to my family. I won't do it. You would seek another form of food production, not meat.
Interesting.
That's the first step in holistic plan grazing.
Looking at the societal effects, economic effects, and environmental effects.
Whether you have to run livestock or you can run livestock.
Okay.
In Brazil, you can run livestock, but if you do, you'll do damage. So you discover that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, in parts of America where people are so terrified of livestock numbers, all right, you have to run more, but they won't because they so fear the numbers.
Right.
And the decline there has been very fast. Professor Bob Steger, I don't know if Bob's still alive or not, but he was one of the first professors to come to me and talk to me and want to work with me. And at one time, he asked me if I knew what the stocking rate was of San Angelo in central Texas at the turn of the last century. And I said, I don't know, Bob. And he told me. And it literally looked like science fiction. So that was the official government change in stocking rate in 100 years in Texas. And as he said, 100 years ago, it looked like science fiction today.
Really? What was the big difference?
the training of American universities, the ecological illiteracy.
And that was driven by the policies.
No, that's driven by the thinking. Don't forget.
Okay.
The whole of this profession of range science is based on deep beliefs that have assumed scientific proportion. So if you look at thousands of peer-reviewed papers, and I have read hundreds, all right, I've never seen a single one define overgrazing. Now, why do you not define overgrazing in range science papers? The answer is because you know for certain what it is. Remember, I said only ignorance of what we know, ignorance never blocks learning. So every student we were teaching them that overgrazing is too many animals. I was taught that at university. That was when I had to discover in 1965, oh my God, we're wrong. Okay, so you can only overgraze plants, but you can read hundreds of thousands of papers about overgrazing range, studying range that's overgrazed and range that's not grazed. Well, you can't overgraze range. You can only overgraze plants. Range is made up of sticks, stones, beetles, insects, soil, millions of microorganisms. How the hell do you overgraze them? But when you're raising whole generations of students on false information, you get the results you get.
So in your mind, how does that change at the university levels and where these people are getting trained? What is the best mechanism for that?
You can't, and that's what that comes to the second part of our work. And now I say our. When I mentioned the memoir, I said if I hadn't been forced into exile, we never would have broken through. Exile forced me to work with 2,000 scientists in America. Now that, I said, was the most creative period of my life, because those were caring people, brilliant people, and that's when we broke through with the second part of the problem. So the human belief has been for thousands of years that desertification is caused by livestock, overgrazing. Overgrazing is too many animals, and that became a scientific truth. Now, in a 12-minute COP26 talk, I blew the second part of this, and that is another human belief that is faulty. So if you, in your podcast, interview any manner of policy formers, any government, any universities, ask any lay people, so nobody's to blame. It's just a human belief. The human belief is there are many, many ways of managing and developing policy, which is management at scale. All right? So that's a belief. I held that belief. I held that belief when I was president of a political party. I held that belief most of my life. And when I was working with those 2,000 scientists, we were challenging everything I taught. I spent an hour every day donated or dedicated to, we've got to find the faults, if the logic or the science. And so we would do nothing but criticize my work. And I don't know any scientist that's ever done that, but it was very enlightening. And that's led to us breaking through. Now, what we discovered in that was, oh my God, all humans only make decisions the same way, including all governments. So whether you're looking at a dictatorship or a democracy, a one-party, two-party state, there's no point in them blaming each other because they all do the same way. And so you end up with the wrong result, whichever party you have in. And America's experiencing that. Mm-hmm. Right? So we discovered that in 1983, that unknown to us, all governments, whether democratic or dictatorship, do not form policies scientifically, dictatorially, democratically, blah, 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 all the policy libraries you can read in universities with all the different ways. No, if you peel the onion, it's exactly the same, everyone. And it's the same way, we've done it forever. So once we discovered that, then we could say, okay, now we know how we can begin to address the cause of the problem.
So what was the biggest takeaway that you got from that epiphany of this is how we're going to move forward?
Well, the biggest takeaway probably was a sentence that's in my textbook. So if you read in my textbook on policy, there's a sentence there that's was drafted by one of that group of 2,000 professional people. These are professors, foresters, etc. And the actual statement was, we now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States. When a group of professional people can make that statement after analyzing hundreds of their own policies in a week of training, that was dynamic. And it's been totally ignored by all universities, all government agencies, all media since.
So we just keep reciprocating the problem.
We just keep doing. And then I repeated that in India and Tamil Nadu, at Bhubaneswar. I repeated it in Lesotho. I repeated it in Zimbabwe with members of parliament. And every place we repeated it, we found the same conclusion. All policies unsound, leading to unexpected results. So if you look at the United States as you're doing, look at the policy on drugs. It increased drug use. It spread violence to Central America, to Africa, to Europe. American policy on drugs. If you look at America's policy, war on weeds, it spread weeds. We've spent, since I've been in America, which is now 40 years or something, we've spent over $1 billion every year. We haven't killed a single weed in a single state. And we've poisoned the water, bankrupted the farmers, bankrupted the ranchers. We're killing the Western ranching culture, and we just keep doing it.
No, we're not getting the results.
Yeah, and look at America's war on terror. It increased terror. It doesn't matter what you look at. Look at COVID. COVID in 4 months did more economic damage globally than World War II did in 4 years when I was a child. How the hell can a COVID virus do that? It can't. What did the damage was how every single government developed policy. And it's exactly the same thing that is leading to climate change.
So does that leave you hopeless?
No, I'm hopeful if people can conceive of the fact or the story I've tried to give in the memoir, that nobody's to blame. We've got to stop blaming. There were some things we hadn't discovered. And if we'll heed that, we can pull together and literally we can begin to solve these problems in harmony without all this blaming. So I don't today blame deliberately anybody. But you will hear me being critical of institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Because our institutions are a major part of the problem. We have to have them. The average American or citizen of any country today cannot even make a toothbrush, let alone grow a carrot. Okay? It's done by a corporation or somebody else, but usually by a corporation. And there's a problem because you've got to have corporations and universities and governments and so on. You can't do without them. It is our only way of pooling resources, capital to achieve efficiency at scale. But if you study system science, those are part of the three things we're managing. We're managing our families, our communities, our institutions, and economy and nature to produce everything. Music, art, literature, bombs, food, cannons, everything is produced. Now, if what you're managing is the family, okay, so take that, so that you're a farmer, say, the first thing you have to do on your farm is finance yourself. If you can't keep your farm economically upright, you end up committing suicide, as American farmers do, when they can't sustain their family. So you manage your family. First thing you have to do is manage your economy. Then you manage nature to produce beef, milk, dairy, whatever. All right? Now, take a government. take a university, take an environmental organization, take a farming organization. Once you form an organization, it's not a human. It doesn't behave like a human. It's a legal entity. Now, the first thing that legal entity has to do is finance itself. If it goes broke, it's out. It has to gain support of people. If it can't gain support of people, clients, whatever, it's out. Then, when it can finance itself, it manages nature to produce something. And when you take a political party, a dictatorship or a democracy that's coming to develop policy, what is the first priority of the political party? It's to finance itself. If the political party can't finance itself, it's out. It's got to gain support of people to fund it. And then it's got to stay in power at all cost. No matter what it costs, it's got to stay in power. Now, its fourth concern in case of parties is the citizens' interests. So you'll never get sound policy developed that way. So basically, that's the second part of what we learned. We're all doing it the same way, and that is what's causing the problem.
Yeah, those are some very interesting insights.
Now, what people may not get from what we've said, I've said it's the same way there, and I know if I was one of your audience, I'd say, what the hell is that way then?
Right.
And you didn't ask me that. You need to get on your toes.
That's kind of what I meant by the, the question, are you hopeless, right? What if you're not hopeless, then what's the hope? What do you have? You've got to have some sort of a solution, as you were talking about before.
Yeah, I do. And I put it out 2-3 years ago at COP26. I was asked as one of 3 people to talk at COP26 in a sideshow, along with Vandana Shiva, and I forget who the other one was, and myself. And we were asked to talk about regenerative agriculture. Now, you can get that on YouTube, and I've just today got a transcription of it as well. Now, in that, I explained that I'd been invited to talk about this, but I didn't intend to, because there were other people talking about agriculture. I know so little about agriculture. I know so little about carbon and all the things they were talking about. I said, you've got lots of far more able people than me talking about those. So I'm going to talk about the cause of the problem. And so it's a 12-minute talk, and I offered hope to the whole world. Because I said, with what's going on, I don't care if you go to COP 26 as we were to COP 100, you'll still be just complaining and whining and blaming. Because I said, if you look at that COP and you look at the 2 COPs since, if any of your audience look at what all the speakers said, let's say about agriculture, which is the basis of civilization, if you look at it, you'll find there were people arguing for the production of food by farmers based on the biological sciences, of which the main one is ecology. That is the scientific foundation of agriculture. So you've got people arguing in favor of that. And then you've got far more people arguing in favor of corporate production of food based on chemistry and technology, marketing technology. Okay, and that's the bigger bulk. And then you've got the apathetic people in the world, and if you're apathetic, you support the majority. So that's the place now. And I said, now nobody is talking about the cause of the problem, because they're all talking about how to produce. And I said, at this conference, you'll have people talking about how to produce electricity from nature through sun, thermal, geothermal, nuclear, tidal. But all they're arguing about is different ways of producing electricity from nature. And then all the farmers and the corporations and the people, all they're arguing about how to produce food. But everything you produce, you don't manage. And I said, nobody at this conference will be talking about management. And yet every sane scientist in the world today acknowledges that humans are causing climate change. Now, that acknowledgement, to me, using science and common sense, is monstrous. The whole world should have leapt at that and said, thank God, we've discovered what's causing the problem. Because if humans are causing it, then it means fossil fuels can't cause it. It means livestock can't cause it. You can't have two causes of the same problem. Science, common sense. You can have many things influence a problem, many things exacerbate a problem, but there'll only be one cause. So the moment humans acknowledge that we're causing climate change, then it's management. It is how you manage fossil fuels. It is how you manage cattle. It is how you manage crop fields, etc. So if we focus on that management, we can quickly come together and solve the problem. But everybody is keeping on talking and arguing about how to produce, including, I hate to say, in the regenerative agricultural movement. Over 600 organizations now. And as far as I can see, all of them are arguing in favor of farmers producing food based on biological sciences. They're not talking about the management. Yep. I hope you see the subtle difference.
Yeah.
But vital difference.
I'm trying to picture it in my mind here a minute. So you're saying the management doesn't take into account the other principles of the holistic thinking.
No, don't make it complicated. Simplify. What management doesn't take into account is the complexity of the family, the human, the organization, the complexity of the economy, and the complexity of nature. All of these are very, very complex.
Right.
And where you can choose to produce beef or dairy or cheese or wine or bombs or cars, when it comes to managing these three things that we manage, all of us, from household to governance, we cannot choose. As I pointed out earlier, you can't choose to manage your family without the economy.
Right.
Okay, so we just don't have anybody studying how to manage these three together, and that is what we began by when I said, not through any wisdom, accidentally, as a young firebrand, fanatical young ecologist, I caught on, oh my God, it's our management that is leading to the loss of biodiversity in wild areas of Africa, because we couldn't blame livestock. We had tsetse fly. We couldn't blame corporations. We couldn't blame greed. We couldn't blame ignorance. We couldn't blame colonialism. We couldn't blame slavery. And I'm just mentioning some of the things we blamed.
Right.
There was nothing to blame except us professional people, me, managing it.
Now I see it.
Now, if to help your listeners, if it would help them, what is it in management that is in the family, in throughout society, and then into our universities, government, etc., that is wrong? You see, that's the next logical question. If management's causing it, and everybody, the bulk of people managing, are doing their best. They've got good intention. They're doing their best. We've got
very few people are doing it out of wrong intentions.
Yeah,
I think.
Absolutely. Most people are good. They're doing their best. Okay, so then why is it going wrong? Well, let me take you and I. Tell me if I'm wrong. Haven't you throughout your life made every conscious decision to meet a need you had, to meet a desire you had, or to solve a problem you faced?
I would say yes.
Every human will say yes. The problem starts right there. That's why I say we've got to stop blaming each other. You're living in a holistic world. You're living in a world of great complexity, where the family is very complex, the society, the culture is complex, the economy is complex, and nature is mind-blowingly complex. We may never understand it. So you're living in that, and you mean to tell me you make every decision to meet a need, a desire, or solve a problem? What did you expect except unintended consequences. Take it to a government level, it's exactly the same. That's why I say we have to stop blaming. Now, what we do different now is we accept that human decision-making will never change. It's been like that for 1,000,000 years. It's not going to change. I will never change it, and I haven't changed it in my life. And that's another big mistake I made. All right? I thought we could change decision-making, and then I had to swallow my words and correct it.
And realize humans are going to be humans for the rest of history.
Yeah, so you look at my third edition of my textbook, and it's called Holistic Management, not Holistic Decision-Making. I don't know what holistic decision-making is, but so many people are talking about holistic decision-making derived from my work by not keeping up to date and learning as we go. All right, so what we do is we now acknowledge those things, meeting a need, a desire, solving a problem, I think we can accept will always be the reason for our management actions. What we need is a context for them. The reason and the context cannot be the same. That was aha that we got in 83, and so we developed a new concept that is not in any branch of science, not in any branch of philosophy, not in any religion in the world, of a holistic context. And that just simply means at any level, you just get the appropriate people, not everybody, the appropriate people who are making management actions, and you get them to determine how, in that culture, they want their lives to be. Not what they value, not what they want, how they want their lives to be. Secure, clean food, know how to do it, no prejudices. And then when that is clearly defined, we get them to describe the environment, not as it is today, but in terms of process, how nutrients cycle, how solar energy flows through it, etc. It's very simple, basic stuff. And we describe the environment of that, if you're managing a farm, for instance, as it will have to be, not what you want, how it has to be 200-300 years from now for your descendants to live like that. And now, next, is a third part. You on the farm, or anybody, has to trade. That's what economy is about. It started by barter, and then it went to economy and coins, and now it's bitcoins and so on. But it's trade. So you have to trade with people. So you have to be trustworthy. So you're not judged at the end of the day by your words, your slogans, your marketing, your branding. At the end of the day, you and I are judged by our behavior. So the third part of the holistic context is we get that community, that family, whatever it is, to describe how they will have to be, not appear to be. Gandhi said it best, be the change you expect. So you now pretty ruthlessly look at your behavior. And then with that meaning more to you than anything in life, and you can't say, well, my children mean more because they should have been in that. You can't say, well, my religion means more because it should have been in there. You can't escape it. You should want this to happen more than anything in life. Now you just begin to make decisions in that context as you meet your needs, your desires, etc. And the results become totally different.
Yeah.
Same people, same knowledge, the results become totally different.
How come they don't teach this in university?
Well, that's the problem when you form institutions, they take on a life of their own, as I said, but we have to have them. So to give you an example of that, the institutions defend the thinking of the day in which they're formed. And so you get two types of discovery. You get one type of discovery, which is 99% of discoveries, and it's something genuinely new. So everybody knows it's new, and your institutions know it's new. Government, environmental, farming organizations, universities, everybody. All right. So those things we subject to the scientific method, testing, argument, debate, establishing in any way we can whether it's right or wrong, etc. That's the scientific method. And we may have 10 years of debate, 2 years of debate, argument, whatever. And then it's rejected as faulty, or we accept it and we give awards and Nobel Prizes and we move on. Now, periodically, very rarely in the history of the world, we've had another type of discovery. And that type of discovery, the ordinary lay person, an ignorant person, and a literate person can see, that's right, that's new. I didn't know that. All right? But our institutions know it's not a new discovery. They know it's wrong. And they lead the opposition. So if you look at what you and I have been discussing this last hour or so, we have been discussing two discoveries that are regarded as heresy. The whole world believed that livestock were causing desertification. It became the scientific truth of all universities teaching agriculture. So when I came up as an ignorant, hardly educated little ecologist in Africa and said, hey guys, we're wrong, we have to have them, you can see why I was crucified and why not a single farming organization, ranching organization has yet supported me. Not one. Not one university, not one environmental organization, because that was seen as heresy. When a group of 2,000 of us scientists in America came up with a second discovery, when the whole world knew that you can develop decisions and take management actions and develop policies in hundreds of different ways. Hundreds of ways. And this body of people came up with the conclusion, oh my God, we're wrong. All humans only do it the same way, as you and I talked about a moment ago. Do you see, universities know that's wrong. Everybody knows that's wrong, so it gets condemned. So that is the issue we have to overcome in all our institutions. So it's no good blaming bureaucrats or blaming whatever. And I had an example of that here a short while ago. I had two gentlemen talking to me over coffee. One, I think, had a PhD. They were both well educated. And they said to me, Allan, you're doing something wrong. We've been watching for the last 50 years, you struggling. What you say seems to be such common sense, but we've seen the intense opposition, whole governments trying to crush you, and universities, etc. So you're doing something wrong. And I said, yeah, you guys, I accept that. I've had many, many people tell me I'm doing it wrong, but I've had nobody tell me how to do it right. And I said, but so let's look at you guys. What about you? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, what about you? How are you doing? And they said, we don't understand you. Again, I'm hopeful because in the way that we facilitate policy development with governments, etc., sovereign states, which is only level that you can pass laws and regulations through which policy is carried out, in the way that we facilitate that, the Savory Institute developed over all these years, we've had to work out a way to neutralize the bad effects, the wicked problems as they're called, and utilize the good effects of our institutions, etc. Because as we said earlier, individuals are all doing their best, or most of them are doing their best. There are, of course, wicked people, there are crooked people, but I've all my life believed that most people are doing their best. And it wasn't going right. So how do we build on that? But we have to use our political parties, our institutions. So over the years, we've worked out a way to do that where everybody wins. And you use the institutions, but you get them to behave like a human being.
Well, Allan, I really appreciate this this great conversation. A lot to think about, a lot of good perspective over a long career. You've done some really interesting things. You've had many different careers within your career. That's very interesting to me, and that gave you a lot of perspective, I think, and helped you.
Well, a different perspective, and you got the same from your founding fathers.
Yep.
Remember, they were in a small population at war, and you had people who were farmers, soldiers, politicians at the same time in a small population. Very, very similar. And I found that George Washington's thinking, was very close to mine, even though I never knew about his thinking. Other people referred to me it later. So yeah, it was very similar. That was the part that small population played in solving this problem.
Again, thank you so much, Allan.
Well, thank you, because you helped to get a little bit of common sense out there.
Well, thank you once again for listening to the rest of the interview with Allan Savory. Again, this is probably one of my favorite interviews that I've done with a guest, just because of the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that Allan has gained over such a vast career, that he's worked in so many different aspects, politically, military, ecologically, and as a farmer. I'd really love to hear what you guys have gotten out of this episode and the last two episodes with Allan. Please reach out to me directly. You can DM me on LinkedIn or check out some of our social media pages. You can contact me through those as well. And as always, if you'd be willing to share this episode or any of our episodes with somebody you know, we really appreciate that. That's how we grow our audience here at the AgCulture Podcast. So with that, until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller, and thanks for listening.